This is going to sound really strange coming from a guy who made a 1 hour and 7-minute long video on the topic, but I genuinely don't care about cults. Or what I don't care about is whether they believe in 8th dimensional psychokinesis or being healed by blabbering on the phone. All that stuff is just phony, it's made up. So what I do care about is how cults are kind of like little dioramas of everything that's wrong with our societies. And because they're so contained within the borders of the cult, it's so easy to lift them up and have a little look at all the little flaws and things that's wrong inside of there. Today, I'm going to tell you about my favorite cult. It's my favorite because of the nature of how I came across it, but it also has one of the best qualities a cult could ever hope to have. It's dead. Well, I thought it was dead. Let me take you back in time to my very first encounter with the ESP Kagaku Kenkyujo, or ESP Research Institute. In 2019, I took a really weird job as a second-hand luxury live stream salesman. It's a mouthful for sure. In this job, I'd show up every 3 or 4 times a week on a Facebook live stream, and I'd have a fresh set of luxury bags like this Prada here. And you know, because all these items were second-hand, right? You have to thoroughly go through the corners and stuff to disclose every unique flaws of the items. And of course, as you open up the bags and have a look inside, you know, the wallets, the small leather goods, whatever it was, you would occasionally find forgotten stuff. I've pulled everything from Q-tips, tampons, cockroaches, coins of course, little amulets. I once even pulled an entire dish of pasta. When I look inside, I do actually find pasta, guys. I found pasta in the bag. Check it out. But I can also send it with pasta if you want it. Probably you won't. If it's express shipping, you can probably eat it from the microwave. All right. Yeah, I may have planted that one. So one day, as I was going through a Louis Vuitton long wallet in the bills compartment, I came across a peculiar sticker. My first thought was, of course, shit, this is gonna deprecate the value of the wallet. So I made up a little excuse that, yeah, you know, maybe it's from like a shrine or something, and that the Japanese gods is gonna bless your wallet with lots of more money. Even though, considering that it was a second-hand luxury wallet and they probably needed to sell it to make some money, it didn't really work very well. But that's besides the point. The thing was, I didn't really think about it until it happened again, and then another time, and again and again and again. For some reason, all these fucking Louis Vuitton wallets had these darn seals inside. And now my interest was piqued. It was just, you know, it would be frustrating if that was the end of it, right? Like I didn't have any more info on that sticker, and I know that feeling because I couldn't find any more info on this for a full year. Because later, next year, I went to a occult variety store by the name of Hakuchuum. And you know, super cool store. If you're in Osaka, I recommend visiting them, even though they banned me from their Instagram account. Regardless, between the Hanya masks and the porno mags from the 60s, I saw a crystal ball, and within that crystal ball was a metal pyramid. And you guessed it, the symbol on that pyramid was exactly the same as on the sticker. I instantly Google lensed it and came across the website for the ESP Kagaku Kenkyujo. I knew it! It was a cult. Of course it was a cult. I swear, if you live here long enough, spotting cults is like spotting a bombable wall in a Zelda game. So will this look like an E? This way? This way? I think this, because it's, no, it's this way, right? Yes. ESP Kagaku Kenkyujo was a cult that rose up from the 80s occult boom, just like Happy Science or Aum Shinrikyo or many other cults. Unlike Happy Science Ryo Okawa, Katao Ishii, the leader of ESP, wasn't much of a writer. He was more of a yapper, if you will. Because it would take several decades until podcaster became an actual job title. he would be a little ahead of his time and record his yaps on tape, which would be put in envelopes and sold and shipped off to the members via mail, and those envelopes were sealed with this sticker. Organically, the members started taking out these seals and started putting them on places where they felt they needed power, like on the aching knee or on the broken car, or, as we know, in their wallets. When the cult realized what foolery people were doing with their seals, they were like, oh man, we can't stand around and look at this. I mean, this is pathetic. Think of the ROI! So, of course, what they did was that they took the stickers and started selling them piecemeal and started branding them as Wonder Seals. They also have these other ones called Esper Seals. I'm not really sure what's the difference. I got these off Mercari. These ones, I love the titles of these. This one right here says it's practical use ESP. ESP, of course, stands for extrasensory perception, which, you know, psychic abilities. So psychic abilities, practical psychic abilities for the 21st century space age. The space age, come on, space age. Man, that's a cool world. We should bring back space age. And then these ones right here is for a bright future. This is practical Esper Seals for like body, for the body and mind, like for healthy body and mind. So a little bit of a mental health care there if you can't afford BetterHelp. I never opened these, so why don't we just open and have a look? Do we actually have the stickers here? Oh my goodness, it comes with an instruction manual and the prices. I think the ones I have are 30 and there should be 1,000 yen per piece. This is like a price list, so you can buy more, I guess. And these are the ones I got. I mean, they must have made so much money on this. I mean, come on. Look at this. They're the original ones. They're sealed. These are the ones that I found in the wallet. Can you see? They said it's for practical use, so I guess we should wish me the best in this video. For fun, let's have a look at the Esper Seals and see if they're any different. They are different. Look at these. They look more like Band-Aids. Yeah, these are like for the body. That's so funny. Yeah, it said it was for the body and the mind. So I guess maybe this is more for like stuff, and this is more for, look, it's like a little Triforce. I have a crazy story about these, which I read on a Amebrogu when I was doing research. If you want to know that story, let me know in the comments, and I will make a little, maybe a reel or something. This quickly became one of my favorite little stories to tell people at parties, so I would seem more interesting. I even highlighted their website in a work TikTok. Speaking of the website, it's notable because when I first visited the website, what met me was like a broken, old, full of like colorful hyperlinks. It looked like it was from the 2000s. The shop seemed defunct. I didn't want to waste my time there, so I just left. But then when I started researching for this video, I went back there, and as if someone had listened to my previous video.
If you're a cult leader, hello, wake up. Now's the time to start selling your alternative to real life.
Welcome to the new website. Updated, modern, fancy even. What happened? Their leader was long dead, so what was going on here? Even the shop was up and running. You had the cassettes were there, there was dubious health supplements as if they were ripped off of the shelves of Alex Jones, the expensive crystal ball that I saw in the occult shop, and of course, the Wonder Seals. At first I was thinking, did I prematurely declare ESP dead? And yeah, ESP was clearly fallen from grace, but it was far from dead. Because when do you think a cult dies? Is it when its leader dies? Is it when it's riddled with criticism and banned by the government? No. A cult dies when it is forgotten. In Japan, many things are forgotten, especially if they relate to foreign policy in the early to mid-1900s. Why am I telling you this? Well, because the half-life of ESP, its refusal to die, is explained by understanding its arbiter. Katao Isshi was born in Saga Prefecture in 1918. This was an important part of Japan with its eastern and western ports, but this region also had suffered from famine for a long time. The reason was that they had a lot of wetlands and struggled to make enough food for people. So, after 100 years of land reclamation, they finally had enough rice fields to feed everybody. The one thing they needed now was workers. If you were a young man like Isshi at the time, your only two real options in life were to either work in those scorching fields or join the newly established coal mines. Isshi himself was no nobleman. The only nobility he could claim was the noble heart of his stepsister. When Isshi's mother died when he was only 3 years old, and his dad is so distant that there's no record of him in any document, it was his stepsister that stepped up to raise him. Even though he had the status as the black sheep among 9 other siblings, she was there for him. Isshi was helping his sister in the clothing shop that she was running, but after a family bankruptcy, he unfortunately had to find other ways to support himself. The scorching hot, wet rice fields or the suffocatingly dark coal mines either probably weren't very attractive options. There's of course no way for us to tell what Isshi himself thought about it, but we do know that he somehow found a third secret option. You see, the family bankruptcy was triggered by a recession that came as a result of the start of the Second Sino-Japanese War. This was caused by what's known as the Manchurian incident, which was a false flag operation staged by Japan as an excuse to invade larger China. And so, of course, a lot of the country's resources started feeding into the war machine and left, of course, many families to fend for themselves. And as the nationalist propaganda started to reach Isshi and Saga Prefecture, he found himself unable to serve in the war due to a faulty arm. Despite the faulty arm, Isshi-san found another way to support the empire. He went overseas to work in Taiwan for the Meiji Corporation. Today, Meiji is well known for their iconic chocolate bars, but in the 30s, Meiji were no Willy Wonka. They were a company born out of colonizing Taiwan, basically enslaving the local population and extracting the natural resource sugarcane. Now that I think about it, it is like Willy Wonka. And this rather questionable job is Isshi-san's first recorded solo endeavor. There's very little information on Isshi's life in this period. He doesn't talk much about it, so lucky for us, we have some historical context. What that tells us is that it's a little weird that he ended up there, because they didn't need lowly educated people like Isshi-san in the colonies. They had plenty of locals to do physical labor after all. So that leaves us with the paperwork and managing the workers. And because of his low education level, I lean towards thinking that he had the title of regime loyalist. I see it a little bit like being an ICE agent in USA in 2025. And this is also backed up by the fact that he never talks about what he actually did there. There's another reason I think this, and it's colored by his next step in life. He became the leader of a Manchurian pioneer group. As anyone familiar with history will know, pioneer is very often interchangeable with colonizer, and it is very much the case here too. The Showa Depression had displaced and impoverished many more families than Isshi-san's relatives, and 2 years prior to his arrival in Manchuria, Japan had started sending these families there to relieve the mainland's agriculture. This pilot project was successful in the eyes of the government. Even though the famine was finished, they kept sending people over to Manchuria, and the main waves of Japanese migrants started in 1938, which was just a few years before Isshi himself arrived. Manchuria and the history of this war is one of humanity's darkest chapters. It is in this region and time frame we have the horror stories of human experimentation, bioweapons, chemical weapons, and the infamous comfort woman system. The reason we know how cold temperatures humans can survive before perishing is because of monstrous experiments conducted by Japan in this era. On top of all these atrocities, the Pioneer Project is essentially the same thing Israel has been doing in Palestine over the past 60 years or so, slowly taking land from the local Chinese population and making them second-class citizens. And this was the role Isshi played in 1941 to 1943, when he suddenly returned to Japan, allegedly to get married. If you're an observant viewer, you have probably got a lot of questions right now. I mean, how could a poor, uneducated, lowly reject like Isshi, who couldn't even join the military, travel across Asia in such a short time span? In the 30s. That's crazy. Well, my primary sources for Isshi's life has been the cult's account of his life, as well as his own account, which he writes in the last chapter of his first book, The Last Super Telekinesis. So yeah, as you can imagine, these accounts are pretty biased, and yeah, we've had to interpret them with the hindsight and historical context in mind. I mean, more interesting than what he writes here is perhaps what he leaves out, because his time in Manchuria and Taiwan is simply referred to as my time overseas. And that could mean many things. It could mean that he lied about his entire background. It could mean that he lied about going overseas, or just bits and bobs here and there. Personally, I believe that he did experience poverty as a child, and I also believe him when he says he didn't serve in the army. Although the army thing has a few asterisks, because in his account of his time in the army, he spends way too much explaining why he couldn't go there. Like it's weird. Like, nobody needs this. It feels like he's making excuses that's haunted him for many years. And his explanation was that as a child he broke his arm, and the doctor didn't fix it well, so it healed weirdly. And so until the day of writing this book, which is in the 80s at some point, because it's released in 85, he can no longer lift his arm. Yet, in the same book, there is literally on the first page a photo of him lifting both arms. So who's to say? I do, however, believe that he lies about the reasoning, and I think that he probably didn't want to go to war. I do believe the shame is that's where it comes from, and I do believe he actually did go overseas, but without the army connection. You know, being a cult leader later in life, I'm sure he was charismatic enough to open some doors and find some opportunities that perhaps other people would have struggled with. The other part of it is that there's really no good reason. If he was looking for a good backstory, the poverty thing is perfectly enough. It's great. Taiwan as well, like, really not necessary, especially when he doesn't talk about it. And Manchuria too is the weirdest one, because there's great shame being connected to colonizing in that era. In 1945, the Soviet Union entered the war on Chinese side, which helped push out the thinly stretched Japanese Imperial Army. What followed was that the 280,000 Japanese migrants were persecuted. Most of them perished in escape attempts or even mass suicides. A scant few became prisoners of war or made it back to the mainland. Those returnees were seen as unethical colonizers by those who had been against this project, while those who had supported the war considered them shameful losers who lost a huge piece of the empire to the enemy. The Japanese state, who had done everything to convince people to go, they largely abandoned them, with lackluster reparations and really just a desire to erase this history. I don't really see a good reason why Ishii-san mentions that he went to Manchuria, because it makes him a messy and divisive character even back in the 80s. If I were to guess, I would say he probably had some sort of higher up company connection or military connection that allowed him to move around the way he did. To escape Manchuria early, you needed some privileges, and I admit, you know, it's a very poorly backed up claim. But I think it's interesting to, see how he wants to portray himself matched up to that historical context. It's not just his time overseas that Isshi-san skips over in his book. He also does not elaborate on returning to Saga his second time. Also, what happens during that time is that he gets married, which is also not mentioned, or the birth of his daughter. He just jumps straight into company life in Osaka. That's right. After a hurricane of a life, Isshi-san was a regular old salaryman for 18 years straight. I'm not going to spend too much time speculating on what happened to him during the 50s to the 70s. It's kind of irrelevant to what we're talking about, but I do think it's important to note how uninterested he seemed in talking about his family during this time.
This behavior fits right in with the contemporary model of the man in this era. The salaryman, in return for lifelong employment, was expected to work very long hours, go drinking with colleagues multiple times a week, and put work above family. So long as you did this, your full-time housewife would be supported and have the resources to raise your children. As such, there were a lot of absent dads in this era. This system seems justified at the time, but after the bubble economy collapsed in the 90s, the one income was no longer sustainable for many, and as the housewives entered the workforce, the benefit and status of the salaryman changed or faded. Yet the same terms were demanded by the companies, thus you were no longer a reliable man, but a company cook. Even in 2025, Japan still struggles to let go of the system, and it haunts workers like some sort of social trauma.
Isshi-san largely avoided this fate because he, quit working long before the bubble burst. And in 1975, at the ripe age of 57, he moves back to Saga Prefecture for the third time to start the ESP group. God knows what possessed him to choose a cult as his retirement project, but that's what he did.
The story goes that one night, while taking a bath after work, he felt this sudden pain in his whole body, like never before. He rushed out of the bath before collapsing on the bathroom floor. At first, he was worried it was a stroke. He didn't have the most healthy lifestyle after all. But then all of a sudden, his hands started moving on their own. Writing in the thin air, it wrote the kanji "Tasukeru," help. Instead of seeking medical attention, he saw this as a sign from a higher power that he needs to go and help people.
The first version of ESP was actually a medical clinic. And it's funny, when he writes in his memoirs that when he first arrived to Saga Prefecture, the locals were skeptical. They were wondering if he was trying to start up some religious organization. But he was like, no, guys, this is clearly not a cult, you misunderstand. It's science. Well, regardless, it must have worked, whatever he said, because through sales of merchandise with quite the markup and seminars and these healing sessions and whatnot, he managed to build a huge following, start opening new offices in various cities, and at some point he was featured on national television, first through a local Osaka channel, which is already pretty big. And that was enough to propel him to nationwide fame for a time. If you watched my previous video on cults in Japan, then you will know why this worked.
Isshi-san was riding the occult boom of the 70s and 80s, where many people who saw no meaning or direction in life, be it poor people, bored housewives, depressed salarymen, or anxious old people, were all looking for new answers. Occultism and spirituality was in. This was around the hippie movement in the US as well, and all of this helped legitimize ESP. The occult era ended with the infamous sarin gas terrorist attack committed by the cult Aum Shinrikyo in 1995. ESP would not be hit as badly by the end of the era, partly because they hadn't been framing Isshi-san as a god, but more importantly, Isshi-san was dead. He died in 1993. 2 years prior to the event that labeled all cults as dangerous.
I mean, think about that for a second. That means the organization was only really active for, 7 years? And 17 if you start counting from the extrasensory stroke in the bathroom. It's kind of crazy. I mean, 7 years and here we are 30 years later talking about it. I find that important to consider because
this is where I see the half-life of ESP Kagaku Kenkyujo really starting. Ishii-san did not talk about his daughter in his first book, but I will not be as insensitive. Mitsuko Ishii was appointed the new head of the organization following her father's death, but she is notably absent from sources for quite a while, before she at some point authors some ESP-related books in the mid-2000s. And based on this plaque from a commemorative event held in Yokohama in the year 2000, it seems she didn't really enter the fray until the turn of the millennia. When I was doing research for this, I had this image in my head as Mitsuko was like this poor little girl who grew up in a dysfunctional cult environment, but the reality is that Mitsuko Ishii was 27 years when her dad started the project and 37 by the time it was fully established. She lived a whole life before one day in her mid-40s woke up as a cult leader. It is extremely hard to find information on Mitsuko. The only sources I have are all the places the cult references her, some legal documents, her author bio on various books, web shops, and an alumni interview from her university. She graduated from Otemon Gakuin University here in Osaka as a psychologist and counselor. Due to low demand, she found a job as a nurse instead and worked as a lecturer whenever requested. Later, after the Great Hanshin earthquake in 1995, she explains the demand for psychological support had increased and she was able to work as a freelancer. It is interesting to note that this kind of coincides with her father's death. Now she titles herself as freelance psychological counselor and supplement manager. Given she is the only one in the article who does not give her social media credentials or website, it's making me think psychologist really means ESPologist. In her interview, she expresses frustration that she couldn't work as a counselor after finishing her degree. She clearly wanted to follow her ambitions. The sources get so thin that my last resort was to scourge Japanese Twitter and 5channel. Twitter has very few mentions of her, but 5channel I did find a few threads, one from 2008 and one from 2019, both discussing the state of ESP in their respective eras. Many seem to hold strong contempt towards Mitsuko, claiming her love for brand bags and luxury had her enforce a sales quota on the ESP counselors, I guess, and had them claim that the old stickers and old equipment all needed to be purchased new and replaced. Now, hate against women is nothing new on 5channel, rather it's the norm. Though here the hate also extends to her son, who also seems to be involved with ESP and is listed as the owner of their herbal medicine subsidiary. And look at these prices. I can understand people are complaining, especially when Ishii said the only thing you need is to act on your own impulses and perhaps have his book or sticker or tapes or whatever. And with that, we've pretty much reached present day. Symbolically, in 2018, the leader of Shinrikyo was executed by hanging, marking the end of an era. But so far, 2020 has been almost like the beginning of a new occult decade. The fear of Shinrikyo is long gone. To give you an example, Dandadan, a series which received manga serialization in 2021 and last year got an animated Netflix series, features characters where the occult crazies are cool and correct. And on the more sinister side of things, the decade was rung in by COVID-19, which since have been shaped by the genocide on the Palestinians committed by Israel. There's also instability in world trade thanks to the US tariffs that's been implemented. There is worldwide inflation. The price of rice has doubled here in Japan. Shinzo Abe, the prime minister, was assassinated by a person who was angry at a cult member. There was, of course, the Epstein files, and we have global warming, and we have looming disasters. It's a lot. And it's creating a new pool of disillusioned people. The big cults, they are well aware of this. Already this year, I've had Happy Science come and leave leaflets in our postbox
5 times. Once came with free tickets to their new movie. The other time, they even knocked on the door to say hi, which is like a page out of Jehovah's Witnesses. They never do that. And they literally said, "Hey, nano shukyo janai yo," like we're not a weird religious organization, which, you know, is one way to try to convince me. But a friend of mine once told me he was tired of being a loser. All this compassion, these niceties, it just wasn't doing it for him. It wasn't getting him where he wanted to be in life. No, instead, he was gonna be a winner. No more being taken advantage of. He was gonna live in a way that benefited him and him only. To hell with the others. Grandstanding like that probably feels good in the moment, but you're also beaming cult member material. When you give in to despair in this way, it becomes really easy for groups like cults to locate what it is that's missing from your life and start feeding you that thing so that you start, you know, pipelining into their system, you know, whatever that is, be it power or agency or a girlfriend or, I don't know, money, it could be anything.
A common analogy often brought up on these kinds of topics are the ones with the crabs in the bucket. If the crabs work together, they could easily escape the bucket. Instead, the ones on the bottom pull the top ones down, ensuring the doom of them all. I see ESP as more of a ghost pot. Get ready for some fishing lore here, guys. When you're fishing for crabs, some people use these traps. You can enter and get the tender bait on the inside, but once the crab is inside, there's no exit. Now say someone forgets their trap on the bottom of the ocean, or say the boyo snaps. Then it becomes a ghost pot. The crabs which are trapped inside starve and die, and then become new bait for new crabs. An infinite death loop, benefiting nobody. This is how I see ESP today. Placing a ghost pot is so easy, yet a single one can cause decades of harm. ESP was really only active for 7 years, and yet it's responsible for 30 years of medical misinformation, misguided ambition, and it's turned the Isshi family into a lineage of generational grifters. ESP isn't entirely dead, but it's not very active either. I got their book for 500 yen, less than the selling price in 1985. The online discourse is in the internet slum that is 5-channel. People on Twitter only ever mention it in surprise that it still exists, and the only truly dedicated people, they look like this.
Hi, こんにちは。今日はね、この最後の超年劇っていうこの本がね、あるんです。これ。これを書いた人、こちら。はい、石井隆夫さんっていう人ね。
Life organization. You know, it could have ended with, hey!
Hello, everyone.
Добрый день, дорогие друзья.
My name is Kenya Matsuda. I'm instructor of ESP Science Institute. This is my wife, Elena. She's going to translate into Russian from English.
Сегодня перед вами выступает господин Кения Мацуда, сертифицированный инструктор ESP.
Today, we are going to explain how to use ESP series.
Personally, I blame Mitsuko Isshi for letting ESP become a ghost pot type organization. It could have ended with her. She could have said, you know what? No thank you. I don't need to be a leader. I don't need all this. Let my father rest, let the tapes and the stickers sell out, and let that be the end of it. Instead, she chose to profit from it. On the other hand, I also get it. You know, like she wanted to do something with her education way earlier on, and some people on the Reddit thread even mentioned that she had said in speeches that if it wasn't for ESP, she would be, you know, cleaning houses in her retirement age, which is what a lot of old people do here in Japan. They don't have the best pension system. So she was probably happy to just inherit anything of value from her dad. They most likely didn't have the best relationship considering, you know, salarymen and dads of that era. But I think bringing her son into the whole thing is what kind of sealed the curse on the family. On the question of the founder, Katao Isshi, whether his intentions were good or bad, I personally think it's completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter. And that's because a man whose sole adult education and opportunity came from, colonial exploitation and war and 18 years of corporate purgatory. I don't think that's a person who's designed to help others. A lot of Ishi's philosophies were things like, the core philosophies were act first, think first, and good things are actually bad things. And I'm sure that this kind of philosophy helped him cope with, the horrors of war and poverty and trauma. But for other people, it's kind of obvious that he wasn't evolving. He was just running away. He even says himself, he honestly believed that if he stood still, if he didn't act on his impulses and just move forward, he would literally die. But you can of course make up your own opinions on both him and Mitsuko. This is how I see it.
Ugh, man, I really hate it when people tell you a depressing story like this and then give you no tools afterwards to feel better. And I kind of get why people like these stickers, at least it's something. But hey, let's try to leave this with something a little bit more useful than adhesive plastic. Oh, jeez. ESP 科学研究所 and groups like it are like traps because they keep you within their borders and they don't let go. Sure, you will evolve and change in there, and that change is to rot and to die. Ishii-san said that he could survive because he kept moving, he kept running. And while I do find it irresponsible to, act on your every impulse, there is an implication that there's power and agency in, making your own choices and taking action. The half-life of the inherited trauma that took the shape of the ESP Kagaku Kenkyujo could have been far shorter if Mitsuko, his daughter, had just processed it a little bit more. If she had used her psychologist education to shape the group and help the members that were remaining to find their own strength, she would have been a fantastic example for her son. She would have been somebody like she wanted to, and she could have turned the group into a healthy space. And these healthy spaces, they're very real. You probably know several of them. They're places that keep you safe. They allow you to grow and wave goodbye with a smile when it's time to leave and support you on that journey. Could be your family, your scout group, your club, your friend group, your maybe a job that was a healthy workplace. It could be any sorts of things. They provide you with the tools you need to grow, to find your own strength and independence and your skill sets. And then when it's time to leave, they wave you off with a smile and hopefully give you some good references if you should ever need them. A supportive, free, and consensual community is the antithesis to a cult. I know, the world might seem like a void at times with the horrors you read on the news or the injustices that you feel yourself, but how that shapes you is more than just social conditioning. It's also shaped by your own will. So whatever you were handed in life, whether it's inherited will or inherited trauma or both, I hope that you find your own personal agency so that you can shape it. Don't run away from it like Ishii-san did, but face it head on and shorten that half-life so it leaves more time for your life. Thank you for watching. Wave a good... She didn't want to wave goodbye. She found her agency. Alright, Ume. That's okay. Be like that. See you next time.